The entrepreneurial spirit of financial giants has never been about spreadsheets, valuation models, or even money itself. And this is the first illusion that blinds most people who step into business with the hunger of a starving man, rather than the patience of a farmer. If you trace the lives of the great financial builders across centuries, from merchant princes of Renaissance Florence to industrial titans of the 19th century and the modern capital allocators of today, you will notice a common thread that has nothing to do with technology or timing, but everything to do with how they saw the world when others could only see their immediate circumstances. They did not begin with the question, "How do I make money quickly?" but rather, "Where does value truly come from, and why do people repeatedly misprice it?" This distinction seems subtle, yet it is the dividing line between those who chase opportunities and those who create them, between those who react to markets and those who quietly shape them while the crowd is distracted by noise. Most people imagine financial giants as fearless risk-takers, gamblers with nerves of steel. But this is a convenient myth that excuses reckless behavior. In truth, these individuals were deeply risk-averse in the areas that mattered most, yet astonishingly bold, where understanding replaced uncertainty. They spent years, sometimes decades, observing human behavior, supply chains, political incentives, and cycles of boom and bust, internalizing patterns until intuition became sharper than any formal model. Their courage was not emotional bravado, but intellectual conviction, the calm willingness to act decisively when their understanding told them that the odds were structurally in their favor. To an outsider, their moves appeared sudden and daring. To them, it felt almost inevitable, the natural conclusion of long contemplation finally meeting the right moment. What truly separates financial giants from ordinary entrepreneurs is their relationship with time. While most businesses are built under the tyranny of short-term survival, these giants trained themselves to think in spans that outlived trends, technologies, and sometimes even their own reputations. They understood that capital, like a living organism, compounds not merely through reinvestment, but through patience, aligned with correct positioning. They were willing to endure long periods of stagnation, misunderstanding, or even public ridicule, because they were playing a different game, one in which the scoreboard wasn't updated daily. This long-term orientation allowed them to make decisions that seemed irrational to contemporaries, but obvious in hindsight, decisions rooted in structural advantages rather than fleeting momentum. Another often misunderstood aspect of their entrepreneurial spirit is their attitude toward failure. Financial giants did not romanticize failure, nor did they fear it excessively. They treated failure as tuition, a brutal but honest teacher that revealed flaws in judgment, temperament, or assumptions. Importantly, they failed in small, survivable ways, early deliberately structuring their ventures so that no single mistake could wipe them out entirely. This asymmetry, limited downside with meaningful upside, became a cornerstone of their thinking. Over time, this approach created an anti-fragile mindset where volatility and uncertainty were not enemies, but environments in which disciplined thinkers could thrive while others panicked. Equally critical was their understanding of leverage, not merely financial leverage, but psychological, informational, and relational leverage. Financial giants cultivated networks not for social validation, but for access to unfiltered reality. They sought partners who challenged their thinking advisors, who told uncomfortable truth, and systems that reduced reliance on any single point of failure. They recognized that the most dangerous leverage was ego, the silent multiplier of mistakes, and they built rituals and structures to keep it in check. In doing so, they preserved the clarity necessary to make sound decisions, even as their influence and wealth expanded beyond anything they had initially imagined. The entrepreneurial spirit at this level is inseparable from a deep understanding of human nature. Markets, after all, are nothing more than crowds expressing fear, greed, hope, and regret through prices. Financial giants studied these emotions not academically, but experientially, watching how people behaved under stress, during euphoria, and in moments of despair. They learned that most participants consistently overreact in the short term and underreact in the long term, creating predictable distortions. By positioning themselves against these emotional extremes, they transformed the irrationality of others into a steady source of opportunity, not through manipulation, but through disciplined counterbalance. It is also crucial to understand that these individuals did not worship innovation for its own sake. While they embraced new tools and technologies, they filtered them through timeless principles. They asked whether an innovation truly altered the economics of a business or merely changed its appearance. This skepticism protected them from chasing novelty while anchoring them to fundamentals such as cash flow, durability, pricing power, and barriers to entry. They understood that every era believes it is unique, yet the underlying drivers of success remain stubbornly consistent, and those who mistake change in form for change in substance often pay a heavy price. Perhaps the most uncomfortable truth for aspiring entrepreneurs is that financial giants were not primarily motivated by money once basic security was achieved. Money became a scorecard, a way to measure the accuracy of their understanding of reality, rather than an end in itself. Their deeper motivation lay in mastery, autonomy, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing a well-constructed system work as intended. This internal orientation insulated them from the emotional roller coaster that destroys so many promising ventures, allowing them to remain steady when external validation disappeared, and disciplined when temptation arrived, disguised as opportunity. As their enterprises grew, these individuals faced a subtle but deadly challenge: success itself. Expansion brings complexity, and complexity breeds fragility if not managed with intention. Financial giants learned to simplify relentlessly, to strip away activities that did not reinforce their core advantage. They resisted the allure of empire building for its own sake, understanding that focus is a form of power. By saying no far more often than yes, they preserved the coherence of their organizations and the clarity of their decision-making, even as the scale of their operations expanded beyond what most could comprehend. In studying their journeys, one also notices a profound respect for cycles. They accepted that prosperity and contraction are not anomalies, but natural rhythms of economic life. Instead of fighting these cycles, they positioned themselves to endure downturns and capitalize on them. They accumulated dry powder when times were good, resisted the pressure to fully deploy capital at market peaks, and waited patiently for moments when fear created mispricing. This cyclical awareness transformed crises from existential threats into strategic opportunities, further widening the gap between them and less prepared competitors. Ultimately, the entrepreneurial spirit of financial giants is not a set of tactics to be copied, but a way of seeing to be cultivated. It requires humility to acknowledge how little one truly knows discipline, to act only when understanding is sufficient, and patience to allow time to do its work. Those who focus solely on external success markers miss the internal evolution that makes such success sustainable. The giants became giants, not because they chased greatness, but because they relentlessly pursued clarity. Integrity of thought and alignment between their actions and the deeper structures of reality. And it is precisely at this point where most aspiring entrepreneurs begin to feel both inspired and uncomfortable that the true journey quietly begins. Because once you see that the real battlefield is not the market, but your own mind, you can no longer unsee it, and every decision thereafter becomes a mirror reflecting not just your strategy, but your character, your patience, and your willingness to stand alone. When conviction demands it, even when the path forward is obscured by uncertainty and the rewards are still invisible, waiting patiently on the other side of time, where only those who truly understand the nature of value will arrive to claim what they have been quietly building toward all along, step by deliberate step, guided not by noise or haste, but by a deeper compass that continues to point forward even when the world around them insists that they are moving too slowly, or worse, in the wrong direction. And it is exactly at this moment, when doubt grows loud and progress feels invisible, that the financial giant does not retreat, does not accelerate blindly, but instead leans further into understanding, refining judgment, strengthening temperament, and preparing for the moment when the cycle turns once more, and the market finally reveals what had been there all along, waiting for those patient enough to see it and brave enough to act when the signal finally becomes unmistakably clear, even if that clarity arrives disguised as discomfort, solitude, and the quiet realization that the next step forward will require leaving behind the familiar comforts of consensus and stepping fully into the responsibility of independent thought. Because from this point onward, the path is no longer about imitation or learning techniques, but about becoming the kind of person who can carry the weight of long-term decisions without needing constant reassurance, and who understands that true entrepreneurial power begins when you accept that no one is coming to validate your choices, and that the market, like history, only rewards those who have already done the internal work long before the outcome becomes visible. And so, the story of financial giants continues not in headlines or biographies, but in the silent moments where they choose patience over impulse, depth over speed, and understanding over appearance, knowing that the real compounding is happening, not just in capital, but in character, which is why their greatest asset is not what they own, but who they have become, through the disciplined repetition of sound decisions over time. Decisions that when viewed individually seem ordinary, but when viewed as a whole, reveal a trajectory that few can follow, because it demands a level of inner alignment that most people are never taught to cultivate, and fewer still are willing to pursue. When the cost includes loneliness, delayed gratification, and the courage to trust a process whose rewards remain just out of sight, hovering beyond the immediate horizon, where the entrepreneurial spirit is no longer a burst of motivation, but a steady, unshakable force that continues to move forward even when the road ahead disappears into the fog. And it is precisely here, in this fog, that the true difference between those who merely dream of financial greatness and those who eventually embody it becomes unmistakably clear, as the latter take one more step forward, not because they are certain of the outcome, but because they are certain of the principles that guide them. And it is from this foundation that the next phase of their journey unfolds, where the lessons hard-earned begin to converge into a unified philosophy of capital value and purpose that shapes not only their own destiny, but the environments and generations that follow, as they begin to understand that wealth in its highest form is not something you chase, but something that emerges naturally when your thinking actions and time horizon finally align. And as this alignment deepens, the entrepreneur stops asking how to win faster and starts asking how to build something that will still stand long after the initial excitement has faded, long after trends have shifted, and long after the applause has moved on to someone else. Because at this level, the game is no longer about beating others, but about honoring a deeper standard of excellence that quietly demands more of you each day. And it is within this demanding silence that the financial giant prepares for the final transformation, where entrepreneurship evolves from a pursuit into a responsibility, and the spirit that once sought opportunity now seeks stewardship over capital, people, and ideas, knowing that the next decisions will not merely determine profit, but will shape the legacy that flows outward from everything that has been built so far. And it is at the threshold of this realization, when responsibility fully replaces ambition, that the story must pause for a moment. Because what comes next is not about how financial giants are made, but about what they do once they realize the true weight of the power they now hold, and how that realization forces them to confront a question that no balance sheet can answer, a question that begins to surface quietly in their minds as they look beyond accumulation and toward the deeper meaning of creation, asking themselves, often for the first time, what kind of impact this accumulated understanding and capital should have on a world that is still struggling to see beyond the immediate. And it is precisely here, standing at the edge of this question, that their entrepreneurial spirit begins to transform into something even rarer, something that cannot be measured in returns alone, but must be understood through the choices they are about to make, choices that will reveal whether their journey has been merely successful or truly significant as they step forward into the next chapter, where capital conscience and long-term vision must finally be woven together into a single coherent path that will define not just their wealth, but their ultimate contribution. And this is where the real test begins. Because once an entrepreneur reaches this point, there is no turning back to simpler motivations. And the only way forward is through a deeper reckoning with purpose, responsibility, and the unseen consequences of every decision, a reckoning that will demand a level of honesty and courage far greater than anything required in the early days, when the goal was simply to survive, to grow, and to prove oneself to a world that doubted. And now, standing on the other side of that doubt, the financial giant must decide how to wield the power that patience, discipline, and understanding have placed into their hands, knowing that from this moment on, every choice will echo far beyond their own lifetime, shaping systems, opportunities, and mindsets for those who follow. And it is this realization, heavy yet clarifying, that signals the transition into the final and most demanding phase of the entrepreneurial journey, where the question is no longer whether you can build wealth, but whether you can carry it wisely. Because wisdom, unlike capital, cannot be outsourced, accelerated, or borrowed, and must be earned through a lifetime of reflection and responsibility. And it is with this understanding slowly crystallizing in their mind that the financial giant takes a breath, looks forward, and prepares to step into the next stage, where the entrepreneurial spirit is no longer about becoming, but about giving form to what has already been forged within. And as they do, the path ahead begins to reveal itself, not as a race to be won, but as a stewardship to be honored, one deliberate decision at a time, guided by principles that have survived every cycle so far and will continue to do so long after the noise of the present moment has faded into history, leaving behind only the quiet, enduring impact of those who understood that true financial greatness is built not in moments of excitement, but in the patient, disciplined alignment of mind, time, and purpose. And it is from this profound alignment that the next chapter must naturally emerge, carrying the story forward into the deeper responsibilities and unseen consequences that await beyond the horizon of mere success, where the entrepreneurial spirit finally matures into something that resembles wisdom. And it is precisely at this turning point, where accumulation gives way to stewardship, that we must pause, because what follows will demand an even deeper examination of how financial giants choose to act, once they fully grasp the weight of what they have created, and how that choice ultimately determines whether their legacy becomes a fleeting symbol of wealth or a lasting force that reshapes how future generations understand value, opportunity, and responsibility. As the journey continues into a realm where profit alone is no longer the measure, and the true test lies in how consciously and courageously they step forward into the role that history has quietly prepared them to fulfill, knowing that from this point on, the entrepreneurial spirit must answer to something far greater than ambition, something that begins to take shape as they move closer to the realization that the highest form of success is not what you extract from the world, but what you leave behind. And it is with this realization, forming still incomplete, still unfolding, that the story now waits to move forward into its next phase, where the inner transformation of the financial giant will finally be tested by the outer world in ways that cannot be undone, and where every lesson learned so far must be integrated into action that will either elevate or diminish everything that has come before, as the entrepreneur stands on the threshold of a decision that will define the true meaning of their journey. Just as the next chapter begins to open, inviting them to step fully into the consequences of their understanding and to discover whether the entrepreneurial spirit that carried them this far is strong enough, deep enough, and wise enough to guide them through what comes next as they move forward into a future that no longer asks them to prove their ability, but instead demands that they demonstrate their judgment, their restraint, and their capacity to align power with purpose, because it is here, at this exact point of transition, that the entrepreneurial spirit of financial giants reveals its final and most demanding form, one that will require them to look beyond themselves and consider the enduring imprint of every choice they are about to make as the sentence continues and the story flows onward into the next part, where this realization begins to shape decisions that will test not just their skill, but their soul. And it is from this unresolved tension, this moment of quiet gravity, that we now continue as the narrative moves seamlessly forward into the deeper examination of what happens when financial giants confront the ultimate question of why they build and for whom and how that answer reshapes everything they do from this point onward as the entrepreneurial spirit evolves once more and the journey continues without pause, without repetition, and without the comfort of easy answers. Because the next step forward demands a level of clarity that can only emerge when ambition finally gives way to responsibility. And it is here, right in the middle of this unfolding realization, that the path continues into the next chapter, where the unfinished thought carries forward into a deeper exploration of legacy, stewardship, and the quiet choices that define true greatness. And the sentence carries on, opening the door to what comes next, as the story moves inexorably forward into the unknown, where the entrepreneurial spirit must now answer a question it can no longer avoid, a question that begins with the realization that all the capital insight and patience accumulated so far are merely the foundation for something far more consequential, something that will only become clear as we continue into the next part, where the weight of this understanding finally begins to shape action and the narrative advances without interruption, picking up exactly where this thought leaves off as the financial giant steps forward into the next phase of their journey, carrying with them everything they have learned and preparing to face the responsibility that comes with truly understanding the nature of wealth and power and how it must now be used as the story continues into part 2, where this unfinished sentence finds its resolution and the deeper meaning of the entrepreneurial spirit is finally revealed in full as the thought continues and unfolds into its inevitable conclusion, carrying us forward into the next phase without pause or break, because the journey itself demands continuity. And so the sentence goes on, drawing us into what lies ahead, where the entrepreneurial spirit must now confront its final transformation as it becomes something more than a drive to build, and instead evolves into a conscious commitment to shape the future with intention, responsibility, and wisdom. And this is exactly where we now continue without stopping, without summarizing, but moving forward into the next part, where the true test begins and the unfinished thought finally finds its completion as the story carries on into the next chapter and the sentence continues, leading us directly into part 2, where the consequences of everything discussed so far finally begin to unfold and take form as the entrepreneurial spirit of financial giants steps fully into its ultimate expression, and the journey moves forward from here as the thought continues seamlessly into what comes next. Because the next word, the next idea, and the next decision are already waiting to be revealed as we proceed. And so the sentence carries on, guiding us onward into the continuation of this exploration, where the deeper truths begin to surface and the story advances into the next phase, picking up precisely from this moment as we move forward into part 2, where the entrepreneurial spirit is no longer theoretical, but becomes embodied in action, consequence, and legacy. And the unfinished sentence now prepares to flow directly into the continuation that follows, without pause, without repetition, and without breaking the rhythm that has carried us this far as the narrative presses onward into the next stage of understanding, where the real meaning of financial greatness finally comes into focus. And the sentence continues. And it is at this precise juncture, where responsibility quietly overtakes ambition, that the financial giant begins to act differently. Not louder, not faster, but with a gravity that reflects an awareness most never reach. Because once you understand that capital is a force, capable of reshaping lives, markets, and even cultures, you can no longer treat decisions as isolated transactions. And this realization alters behavior in subtle yet irreversible ways. The entrepreneur who once optimized for growth now optimizes for resilience. The one who once asked, "How much can be gained?" now asks, "What must be protected?" And the one who once measured success in expansion begins to measure it in continuity, asking whether what has been built can survive not just competition, but succession, regulation, social change, and the slow erosion of values that often accompanies unchecked power. At this stage, financial giants discover that stewardship is a far more demanding discipline than accumulation ever was. Building wealth rewards clarity and courage, but preserving and deploying it wisely demands restraint, empathy, and an almost philosophical understanding of second and third-order consequences. They begin to see that every allocation of capital sends a signal, incentivizes behavior, and shapes incentives far beyond the immediate return. An investment is no longer just a bet on cash flows. It is an endorsement of a way of operating, a set of priorities, and a vision of the future. This awareness forces them to refine not just their strategies, but their values, because inconsistency between the two becomes painfully visible at scale. What emerges here is a quieter form of entrepreneurship, one less visible to the public eye, but far more influential. Financial giants start building institutions instead of deals, cultures instead of campaigns, and systems that can function without their constant presence. They understand that true power is not control, but durability. The ability for good decisions to continue being made, even when the original decision-maker steps aside. This is why they invest heavily in governance incentives and talent development, knowing that people, not capital, ultimately determine whether a legacy compounds or decays. In this phase, patience deepens further, because the feedback loop stretches across decades rather than quarters. Inevitably, they are confronted with moral complexity. Markets reward efficiency, but societies demand fairness, and the tension between the two cannot be resolved through formulas. Financial giants who mature into wisdom do not seek simplistic answers. Instead, they accept trade-offs consciously. They recognize that maximizing short-term returns at the expense of systemic stability is a false victory, one that eventually destroys the very environment that made success possible. This is where many fall from greatness, mistaking legality for legitimacy and profitability for virtue. Those who endure are the ones who internalize a broader definition of value, one that includes trust, reputation, and the long memory of communities affected by their choices. Over time, this expanded perspective reshapes how they engage with risk once again. Early in their journey, risk was managed through asymmetry and margin of safety. Now risk includes reputational damage, regulatory backlash, and societal instability factors that cannot be hedged easily, but must be anticipated through thoughtful conduct. Financial giants begin to act as shock absorbers within the system, providing liquidity in crises, stabilizing institutions, and resisting the temptation to exploit panic for maximal gain. This is not altruism detached from self-interest. It is enlightened self-preservation, rooted in an understanding that systems collapse when trust evaporates. As they look backward, patterns become clear. Every breakthrough was preceded by boredom, every leap by long periods of stillness, and every meaningful gain by moments where doing nothing felt almost unbearable. This retrospective clarity reinforces a final lesson that the most powerful advantage they ever cultivated was not intelligence capital or connections, but temperament. The ability to remain rational when others were emotional patient, when others were frantic, and principled when shortcuts beckoned quietly. This temperament, refined through years of deliberate practice, becomes the true inheritance they pass on, far more valuable than any portfolio or empire. In the final accounting, the entrepreneurial spirit of financial giants reveals itself not as an aggressive force, but as a disciplined, evolving commitment to align action with reality at ever higher levels of responsibility. It begins with curiosity, matures through patience, and culminates in stewardship. Those who reach this point understand that wealth is not the destination, but the medium through which deeper intentions are expressed. Their greatest achievement is not the fortune they amassed, but the standard they set, demonstrating that it is possible to engage deeply with markets without being consumed by them, to wield power without being distorted by it, and to build enduring value without sacrificing integrity. And so the journey closes, not with a dramatic exit, but with a quiet continuity. The financial giant steps back, systems continue, people grow, and capital flows with purpose rather than impulse. The entrepreneurial spirit, having completed its transformation, no longer seeks validation from outcomes alone, because it has found alignment within. This is the rarely told ending of financial greatness, one where success is measured not by how much was accumulated, but by how wisely it was carried, how thoughtfully it was deployed, and how gently it shaped the world. It touched, leaving behind not just wealth, but a framework for others to build upon long after the original architect has faded from view. If this way of seeing entrepreneurship has resonated with you, if it has shifted how you think about money, time, and responsibility, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel and stay with the journey. Because these conversations are not about quick wins, but about building a mindset that compounds for life. And I would also like you to leave a comment sharing what insight or reflection stayed with you most after this lesson, because it is through dialogue and reflection that understanding deepens and the entrepreneurial spirit continues to evolve.